All right, let's paint a witch. So this is our original, painted on a 12-inch MDF round. And she's I hate to say a self-portrait, but she could be. I don't know. Possibly. All right, so we're gonna get started, and the first thing we're going to do is transfer our lovely lady onto our round. Let me see here, let's get this lined up. We want to leave room for our bats up here. Okay, so I just want to put that bottom edge of the cauldron down here. So we're going to transfer the witch and cauldron on. We're not going to transfer on the bats yet. Or sorry, the ghosts, not the bats. A little jumbled I am. All right, so we'll get this hat. So I'm just going to transfer straight onto the round, and we'll paint around her. And the reason for that is the background is quite a dark color, so I didn't want to have to try and base coat over top of the deep midnight blue. So we'll just put her on. So I'm just using my stylus and graphite paper. I have my pattern traced onto the tracing paper. All of these things are in your kit. It's a little bit of a jaggedy hairline. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. We can straighten that up with paint. So we're just doing the basic outline of her face, because we'll add all these details back later on. I do want you to transfer her eye circles on. Don't worry about her eyebrows right now. Come down here to her coat. Let me see, and I'm just going to check and see how far I went there. Let's stick on. Don't worry about the lines on her fingers at this moment. Put a little fingernail on there. All of these little details can be added back on later. And then we have our cauldron. I'm just going to ignore those handles right now. I can put those back on a little bit later. Just want to get that basic outline of the cauldron on here. And I'm just going to check and see. I think I have it all. think I have everything on there that I need. I'm just going to put this line here so I know where hairline stops. And I'm going to remove that. And we can get started. So I'm going to base coat the outer edge here, all of the background with the Deep Midnight Blue first. And we can use our 1-inch brush to get the bigger areas in here first. And then we can use a smaller brush to get closer in those little areas around the witch. And this might take a couple of coats to do this. The MDF might soak in a bit of that paint. I'm just going to try and get as close as I can in those little areas. And then we'll break out our smaller brush to get up to the edge. I typically don't like to paint around things. I find it very tedious. But when you're using a dark color like this, it's sometimes best just to do exactly this and go around everything instead of trying to base coat on top of a dark color like that. Clumps in my paint. So I think we have the majority. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let that dry just a bit. And I'll work on this cauldron down here because I don't want to put my arm in that wet paint, which it's my favorite thing to do. Not on purpose, but it happens. So I'll just grab a smaller brush here. If I have such a thing. And I'll start basing this cauldron with some black. And I'm not going to worry about these lines too much because we can add those in a little bit later. So I'm just going to base the whole thing. On this rim is where I'm going to paint right over that. And I'll add that back in later. Just so we can get this main color down here. All right, I'm going to grab a smaller round. I have a number 1 round here. I'm going to get in these little tiny areas here on the cauldron. Or you can use a flat too, it doesn't matter. Just whatever you're comfortable with to get in these smaller areas. Just gonna turn this a bit so I can use this dry area on the board for my hand, so I don't stick my hand in wet paint. Still a little damp on the outside edge. All right. Okay. All right, so while this is still drying, I'm going to base that stick with some milk chocolate. If I can find the milk chocolate, wherever that did go, there it is. So we'll just work away and get some of these areas based while that outer edge is drying up there. I don't want to add a second coat or get my hands in there quite yet. So I'm just using my number 1 round still. And again, like I said, you can use an angled brush, you can use a flat brush, whatever feels comfortable in your hand is fine. Okay, let that first coat dry on that. And I think we'll carry on to the inside of this cauldron, which is with some Irish moss. And we'll get that based in there. Now, all of these will most likely take 2 to 3 coats as usual to cover. Okay, flip her back around. So while we have some of this black out here, I think I'm going to base in her hat as well. Her collar is also black, so we can fill that in while we have the black happening. Okay. So while that is all drying, we'll come back to our Deep Midnight Blue, and I'm going to grab an angled brush to get in close to these, and I'll probably be using my #1 round as well. Let's clean that big brush out. I don't think I'm going to need that anymore. That centered up there for you again. All right. So we'll just come in with our angled. And like I said, you'll probably have to put another, maybe even spot. It's not too bad actually, but you never know, you might have to add a little bit more here. You'll know better when yours is dry if you have to add another coat. You don't want to see any of that board showing through there. So you have a little area up in here, so I'll just use my round and get that. Just keep my round at the ready because I'm sure I'll need to use it again once we get over there around that hair. Okay, so we have some smaller areas in here. I'm gonna not tempt fate, and maybe I'll just pull out my smaller brush here. turn her around a little bit. Sorry for the upside down. It's easier for me to reach these little spots. Okay, so I got all of that little area in there, and I think we'll just continue on around this side here. My angled brush is, I use this one for base coating a lot, and it's seen better days. I'm very abusive to my brushes. I don't know if all of you are as well, but I have to say I really am. All right, so kind of, I'm going to ignore that little piece in there because I think I'm going to bring her hair down a little bit further. I will do this one, but I think I'm going to fill all of that in with hair once we get her coat based and all that. I will show you what I will do with that. I'm just going to make that travel down a little bit further there. Save having to get all those little areas in there. It's really kind of pointless. And you don't have to be too particular about her hair because we're going to add some of that crazy wild crimpied hair on her as well. Flip this around for a second because I need to just get along the edge of that hat there and smooth out all these lumpy areas I have here. All right, now we have in around her face here. I just want to get in close to there. And I think I can do the rest with my flat brush. After I get in these close areas. So now I just have around the rest of her hat. And I think we're good to go with the flat. So we'll just finish that up and get this background on. Okay, so that's it for the deep midnight blue. So the next part is I think we'll fill in her coat with some royal purple. And there, I just dropped my brush right into my black paint. Alright, so I'm going to use my flat still and get this royal purple on here. And we can go right over that line where her arm meets. We can add that back on in a bit. And I'll get in all these little jagged areas with my smaller brush. Sorry for all the spinning. But I need to just see where I'm at here and reach it. I'm going to break out the small brush for that part too. Just want to get these main areas on here, and then I'll bring out my smaller brush. Making you all dizzy, I'm sure, spinning this around. All right, so I'm gonna pop out my smaller brush and just fill in those tiny areas around your hair and up in here. Excuse me. And there's a little bit under here. This other arm. All right. So this center area of her coat is done in marigold. So we can base that in while we're down here. And that little area right there is also marigold in here. And this is a kind of a transparent color, so most likely you'll need another coat or two to cover that in. Marigold being one of the better ones to use. It's not quite as transparent as some of the yellows, but it's one of the main reasons I like to use it, and I do use this color a lot. For that reason, I don't like to wait and add layers and layers and layers of paint to get things to cover, so I tend to try and stay away from those really transparent colors, just mostly because I'm impatient. I'm going to spin this upside down again so I can get this edge. Hopefully once we get this all based, I won't have to move it around so much upside down. I hope anyway. All right, so we'll let that first coat of that dry and we can move on to another area. So I think I'm going to travel back up here to this buckle because it is also marigold. So we're just going to fill that in while we have that color out. All right, and her hat band is done with a little bit of summer lilac. or a lighter purple, whichever, you know, Purple Cow or any of the lighter ones that are available. Just a shade lighter than this. And if you don't have a lighter purple, you can just mix some white into your royal purple and bring that shade down a bit. So we're getting there. We just have her face and hair, hands left to do for base coating. And that is about it for that. Okay, so I'm going to do her hair last. So the next thing we're going to do is her face and hands. And I did that with Lemonade. It's really just a light green color. If you don't have Lemonade, you can mix down some of that Irish moss even and make it a bit lighter. Just going to get in all these little jagged areas here. And this will probably need a couple of coats as well. I'm just going to go over that chin line or jawline there. We'll put that back in later, just for the sake of time factor. Just going to flip her upside down one more time and get in all these little areas down here. So this is the somewhat ugly stage of the painting. The basing always makes you wonder when you get it done, how in the heck are we going to make that look good? But it seems to all come together as we layer up everything. Bit by bit, it starts to come to life, but this is a necessary part of the painting, so we have to persevere. It's not my most favorite part. I love doing all the shading and everything and seeing it all come together. That's my favorite part. This is just kind of something we have to do. And she won't look very handsome until we start getting some details on there. This is pretty silly looking right now. All right. Get this thumb in here. And her hand, just go around her fingers there. Or her knuckles, I should say. All right, and then we'll get this hand. All right. So we can add her hair in now, and that is with some slate gray. And I'll do the larger portion with my flat brush. Got some purple in there. I guess she's gonna have a little bit of purple hair. My brush wasn't cleaned out very well. This is the part where I told you I'm hard on my brushes. That's the part I mean. I don't clean them out very well, and then they... Anyways, that's an awful thing to say, but it is the truth. Okay, so I'm gonna get my little round brush out again and fill in some of these crazy jagged areas. We want to just go all the way up here around her face. And that area down here that I said I was going to bring down a bit further, we'll do that. So I'm just going to kind of fill in that down a little more so that it covers just the back of that coat there. Again, like I said, her profile of her hair is not really that important because we're going to be adding a lot more to it. So there, I think that solved that little problem. this will get finished, and then I think we just have to base in her eyes with some white, and then we can go back and add a second 2 to 3 coats to this. And then once we get all of that done, we can start our details. Let's have a few more little jaggedy areas here of her hair. I'm just going to down like that for now. Just want to get that color on there. Doesn't have to be perfect on this first coat. Just get that first coat down there. And then on her eyes, like I said, just a little bit of white to base those in. She's gonna look pretty funny right now with her blank stare eyes, but I promise you she will come together. Her eyes are kind of buggy there too, aren't they? All right. Okay. So that is our base coating. So you can go ahead and get 2 to 3 coats on all of this. And then we will move on to the next step of our witch. Okay, so after you get all of your 2 coats of each color on here, and that's all nice and completely dry, we're going to take, I'm using my Lunar Blender, but you can use a stencil brush, and I'm using some French gray blue, and I'm just going to do some dry brushing. So I'm just going to work that in on my hand to make sure it's nice and dry in my brush. And I'm going to start in these tiny little areas here, and I'm just going to rub that. You can see we don't have the fingernail blocked in yet, but we will do that soon. So I'm just rubbing that French gray blue onto that background. And you want to make sure there's not a lot of paint on your brush and it's nice and dry. That's why I work it in on my hand, because I don't want it to be too dark. I just want a nice light hint of it. And I'm just going to reload. So all that we're doing really is just adding a little bit of contrast to the background. Doesn't take too much effort to get this on there. And just lightly on the first coat. If you want to darken it up, I would suggest that you do it by layering it up, not doing a completely dark coat off the first bit. And if you want any more than that, you can just, like I said, layer it up. I'm going to leave mine as is, I think. If you want to darken it up just around here, you can do that, or wherever you want. But that is basically how we do that. All right, so the next step, I think we're going to travel up here and we'll start work on this hat, and we'll kind of just work our way down. And I'll just grab my shader. And I think I'm going to start with the slate gray, and we'll start shading a bit of that hat. So I'm just going to go along that outer edge there. All right, and then we'll come down here to the brim. And right across this little edge here, and we want to extend that out just a little bit further past her hair, like so. And for the hat band, we'll use a little bit of the royal purple, the same color we used for her coat. Get a little bit more of that. Mine has dried up on my palette. And we're going to go along that bottom edge here. And also inside the buckle. Okay, and then we'll take a bit of white and go along the top edge of that. And for the buckle, we're going to use a little bit of burnt orange. And I'm just going to go along this bottom edge here. And around that bottom edge of the buckle. And while we have this out, I can take my fine liner and we'll fill in her fingernail. And we can also shade the inside of her coat in this marigold area. And we'll go along the side of this stick here. And we can put a little bit on this bottom edge as well. And once it's dry, if you need to darken that up any, you can go back and do that. All right. So the next step, I think we'll work on some black on her coat. Have to see if I have some black still here. So we can start up here under her collar, and you can transfer those lines back on. I'm going to try and do mine without doing that. But by all means, yes, transfer those lines back on if you need to. And you can do that with the white transfer paper or the carbon paper. I think you should be able to see the carbon paper through that, as through this dark purple as well. And we'll come under her arm here. And I believe her arm is right about And again, you can go back and darken up any of these areas that you need to once the first coat dries. So we'll go along the outside edge of this orange area. And you can also refer to your photo if you need to see where the shading lies. That's in your pattern. And we'll go along the outside edge of this cauldron a little bit. And I stuck my hand in this side. Lovely fingerprint or palm print on that. We'll fix that. It was bound to happen. It just does. That's me. All right, so you can put a little bit under here, under the hair if you want to. It's not going to really be too relevant because we're going to be covering that hair with another couple layers of things. That's basically that. So I think what we're going to do next is we'll dry brush. You know what, I missed a spot on her coat with that black. I want to do this bottom edge of her cuff too. And along this edge. Okay, so we'll leave that to dry, and while that's drying, I think we can, let's see, what will we do next? I want to add some details back to her face because I'm not going to try and wing that because there's just too many tiny little elements on her face and eyes and eyebrows and all the rest of it. So I will transfer that back on there. But while we're letting that dry, we can take some plantation pine and we can shade the inside of this cauldron on this bottom edge here of this green. We can add a little dark green here. I'm going to just flip her upside down so I can reach this a little bit better, hopefully without sticking my hand in more wet paint. On the edge of that stick. So, and we'll let that dry a little bit. Also, I want to add a little bit of that black while we have it out, just along this bottom edge of her hair. A little bit, and you can add a little bit of that black to anywhere on her hair, really. Like I said, we're going to be covering that up a bit with some kinky hair near the end there, so that's fine. We can just add a few little highlights in there if you want to, or shades, I should say. And you can put something through the center too if you like. So wet my brush a little bit. And kind of just do like a wash over it. It doesn't have to be, my brush is not complying here. Just a little bit of a wash if you want to, just on there, like so. All right. So now that it's dry a little bit there, we can bring our pattern back out, and I want to add some of those details back onto her face. And I'm just going to line my pattern up as best I can. And we'll slide this carbon paper under here. And I want to trace out her eyebrows. We'll add those. And all these lines that we lost when we base coated. And we'll bring her teeth back in. Jawline. You can add in her areas where her fingers meet there. I just want to check and see. I think we're good there. All right. So I can take my little fine liner and I'll fill in her teeth. And we'll get those drying while we work on some other things. And I noticed that a bit of her eye, it's a bit too big there, so I'm just going to cover that in with some of that lemonade color so we can fix that up there. And I think that's good. We can block in her eyebrows with a little of the black and my fine liner, so I'll just fill those in and we'll let them dry while we're working on some other things. We'll go over that hair because we can fix that in a second. So I don't have to paint around the hair. We can fix that hair up once her eyebrows dry. So we have that blocked in. And now we can start doing some more shading. I want to shade on her collar a bit with some of the gray like we did on the hat. So we can do that area while her face is drying a bit. And we'll come across this top, and there's a little dip here. Little fold in there. And add that. Okay. So also we can use some of the same color, the lemonade, and we'll highlight the top of this green area inside the cauldron. so. And we can also use some of our gray, and we can shade. I'm just going to turn this a bit sideways so I can get this. I want to shade under this edge. Now we're not going to see a whole lot of this because we're going to be dry brushing some of that green mist on here, but I just want to define it a little bit. So we have that edge under there. And you can highlight around the top edge here. And this also kind of comes around this here, and you can see that on your pattern a little bit better, that line there. And you can transfer that back on if you like as well. Like I said, you're not going to see a whole lot of this in here because it's going to be covered with a lot of that green mist that we're going to dry brush on there and later. And we still have to re-add the handles onto here as well, but that is coming later as well. All right, so now that her face is a little bit dry, I'm going to take some of that Irish Moss color, and we'll start shading out some of the face details. So you want to shade. You can kind of go in here around her hair a little bit. Just add a little bit of that darker green in there. And you can go along the edge of her nose here. And along the bottom edge of her nose. Again, you can refer to your photo as well to see where these shading areas are. Which always helps when you have that photo reference to help you out. And under this little smile line here, and also around her mouth. So you can go around her teeth. And we also want to go underneath her jawline. So her face details are starting to come to life a little bit there. And you can go along her neckline. bottom of her chin. This little indent here, you can put a little bit under there. And around the outside of her eyes. So a little water on my brush. I don't want that to be too dark there. And now we'll let that dry and we'll move on to her arms and hands. So we'll get under this hand here and we'll go along this side of her arm, along that stick, and the bottom edge of her arm, her elbow. And we'll do along this hand. Put a bit on her knuckles as well. And on her thumb. And her fingers here. So we'll go along this bottom edge and then we'll just kind of do this on the edges of her fingers just to highlight those or shade those out so we can see where they are. And then you can go back and darken any of these up that you like with that color if you want, once they dry. And then what we're going to do is take a little bit of that plantation pine, and you can darken up any of those areas with a little bit of the plantation pine also if you like. If you want to make that a bit darker. Just to give it a bit more definition. Just the tiniest bit, doesn't have to be a lot. We're going to be doing a lot of outlining on her face as well, so you just want to get your shading how you want it before we do that. All right. Now for highlighting on the face and hands, we're going to use a little bit of white. And I'm going to go along the top of this hand here with some white. Along her arm here. And fingers, thumb. Just need to get a bit more white on my palette. go with some white on the opposite sides of where you shaded with the green. You want to just highlight the opposite sides with the white. And I'll highlight in the centers here with a little bit of white for a little contrast. A little bit on her neck. And that's good for me. All right, so we'll let that dry. I'm also going to take a bit of white, and on that buckle on her hat, I'm going to just highlight the top edge here. Like so. You can also take a bit of white and go down this side of her, inside of her coat. All right, so next we're going to take some burnt umber and we're going to shade that stick on the one side. So we will go along this side of the stick. We'll put a little bit under her hand here. And then on the opposite side of the stick, we'll highlight with a little bit of white. All right, so while that's all drying, I'm going to dry brush her coat with a bit of that summer lilac color. Just find a clean brush here. Might have to clean one a little bit actually. So I'm going to be using a Lunar Blender. It's just a smaller size. This one's a 1/4 inch. And I will grab some of that summer lilac color, so that lighter purple. Get that good and dry on my hand. And we're just going to do the same thing as we did on the background. We're just going to rub that paint in there for some highlight, a little bit of contrast on her coat. Just kind of in the center areas there. And you can layer that up as much as you like. And then I'm going to also shade a little or highlight a little bit with that same color on her coat. So we can bring the highlight line down the side here on this bottom edge of her sleeve. Go along the top edge. On this edge of the left side of her coat there. A little bit on her elbow here. And along this edge. Too bright, I just add some water. And then you can darken that up however you like. Like so. All right. So next I think I'm going to grab a little bit of gray and I'm going to shade around the inside edge of her eyes here. And her teeth, add a little gray to those. And I'm just going to grab my fine liner and I'm going to bring that hair back over top of her eyebrow that we painted over. And I think we're ready to start adding some of the fine liner. So I'm going to use my really fine, excuse me, my fine line Sharpie to do this, to outline her face details. So you just want to very lightly, you don't want to use anything too thick of your marker. So this is why I have this nice ultra fine Sharpie. And I'm just going to around her eyes, straighten those up a bit. And then she has a couple little lines here around her eyes. It's hard for me to see at this angle. I'm sure yours will be nice and straight. Trying to keep my hand out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. Going around her teeth, around this edge of her nose here. And there's a couple of lines on her nose. Chin line. So she's starting to actually look like she has some details going on. Okay, so I'm going to put a few of those little wrinkles around her mouth. And I'm just going to use my Sharpie to do that. So, and I think she's ready for some eye dots, which we can add in there. And also the little hairs that are coming out of her chin, I'm going to use a little bit of white in my fine liner. And we'll just line those in. And then I'm going to use my stylus and some black. And I'm going to dip straight into, we're going to get some new black because I think I haven't got enough on my plate here. So I'm just using my stylus, I'm dipping straight into that black. And we'll add those little dots. So just straight down like so. And we'll let those dry before we add the white center dots that are in there. Otherwise they don't go on very well. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and outline her hand. Her arm. And then we can grab this other hand here. And we're going to outline this stick, and we're going to put a bit of wood grain onto the stick using this little marker as well. So you can just kind of line some of those wood grain lines on there, just random here and there. Like so. And then you can continue to outline your arm. Her coat. And then what I did was I also kind of went around her hair with the Sharpie as well, and you can do this with the Posca pen as well. The only area that I would be most concerned about with this really tiny fine liner would be her face details, just because there's such a small area there to get into. You want something with a nice tiny small end on it. So we'll get this outlined, and then we can add some of the kinky hair onto our witch after we get this part outlined. And you can do her hair, kinky hair, with paint pens as well. If you want to use a white and black paint pen, you can do that. Or you can use your fine liner and the two colors of paint. So we can also outline her hat band and the buckle. So she's starting to come together, and I'm so surprised I didn't stick my hand in those two eye dots doing that, but I didn't. I'll just outline her fingernail here as well. All right, so now that we are that far, we are pretty much done our witch, other than the two little white dots that go in her eyes, and we have to finish out her hair here. So there's two options. Like I said, you can use fine liner paint pens, And I have both colors here. I have a white that's a 0.7 and a black as well. You can by all means do this with either. So all I did really was start at the top, and I started, and I'll use the paint pen for now, and I just started adding some squiggles. And I brought them out further than where we painted her hair. And you can bring these wherever you like. Just kind of try and stay within the direction that her hair goes. It's kind of like crimped hair. And like I said, you can do the same exact thing with your fine liner and paint if you don't have any Posca pens. But these are great pens to use. If you can get your hands on some of these, they will make your life very easy. All right, so we'll put that much black in for now, and then we can switch and put some white in there. So I'll just grab the white, and we'll just add some of that in there. I'll just reload my pen. And you can just mix some of that white in there. Quite a handsome lady, isn't she? So it takes on a whole new look when you start adding the white hairs in here. And you can cross over top of your black. You don't have to go in between. You can kind of just bring those in wherever. Cross over top of your black ones. You want her to look like she has pretty wild hair here. But you can see how the Posca pens are just amazing. Make life so much easier, and it's so much quicker. There's many different sized ends that you can get on these Posca pens and different profiles, but I like these little fine liner ones. And again, you could go crazy here and just give her a crazy wild hairdo. But I think we'll stop there. She looks pretty good. All right. So we'll let that dry for a second, and I think we are at the point where we want to re-add our little handles. And I don't want to, it does dry pretty quickly. Just want to make sure it is good and dry before I add those on there. So we'll just bring our pattern back over here and add these little handles on here. Now I'm going to use my white transfer paper just because I won't be able to see it on the black and the dark blue if I use the lighter color, or the darker color, excuse me. So I'll use my white and we'll get these transferred on. And that looks good. And those are painted out with the slate gray color. So I'll just grab my little liner brush and I'll grab a bit more gray. We'll get these handles based out. We'll let those dry. And then we can shade these, and then we can start adding some of our green mist. All right, so we'll let that dry, and then we can shade those out and start adding green mist and some ghosts. All right, these are dry, so we will just shade these out with a bit of black. So I'm just going to go along this bottom edge of the handle. And also with the black as well, just along that left edge with some black. Same on the other one. And along that bottom edge with the handle. And then we will highlight a bit with some white along that top edge. And around the opposite side of that little buckle there, if that's what we want to call it. We're going to call it that anyway. Okay. Now we're ready for some green mist. Now I'm going to use my Lunar Blender again, and I'm going to dip into some of that light green, that lemonade. No, I'm going to use, excuse me, Irish Moss first. I have a bit of lemonade already on here, but I will dip into that Irish Moss color and we'll get that dried down. Now your mist is one of those things as well that you can kind of go crazy with. You can put it wherever you like. I'm just going to start throwing that in there wherever, and I'm going to bring it over here up onto her dress. And you're just rubbing that paint in there. And you'll probably have to reload a couple times and layer this up a bit as well. So I'm just going to keep going and let it go wherever it wants, or wherever you think you want it to go. And you can see that first coat is kind of light, hard to see in some places, but we're going to darken that up with each layer. And it gets a bit dusty there, but just wipe that off. Again, you can make this as dark as you like. And then you can take some of that lemonade and you can mix that in if you want to, that lighter color. Just for a little bit of dimension. And I think that's good. I'm happy with my mist the way it is, so I'm going to leave that so I don't keep overworking it. Next, what we're going to do is we have the bubbles that I will show you on the original here. The bubbles that are all kind of scattered throughout, and you can put these wherever you want. You can transfer those back on if you want to. I'm just going to randomly shade some of those in. So I'm using some of the plantation pine and my shader, and I'm just going to throw a few of those little circles in here, just kind of shading around the outside edge. And you can put these wherever you like. We are going to outline these as well. And I'll put some half ones in there that look like they're bubbling out of the cauldron. Again, there's no rules as to how many bubbles you have or where you put them. Sorry for the noises, my dog is in here. He likes to visit. So for the sake of carrying on with bubbles, I think that's good enough for now. Again, you can put as many as you want all up in here, and you can kind of get carried away with those. And we'll just leave it at that for time's sake. See, I just can't stop. They just go on and on. All right, I will stop. Okay, we'll let those dry, and while those are drying, we can come over here and we can outline our handles if you want. I'm just using my Sharpie. Just clean up those edges a bit. Define those little parts on there. And you can also kind of put a hint of that edge back on your cauldron. Doesn't have to be a consecutive line, just a little hint of that edge there if you want. Under that mist. And then your bubbles, you can, when they're dry, you can outline those. So that you can see them a bit better. Oh, I missed that one. This one. And then I'm going to take my little white Posca pen, but you can use your paint, and I'm just going to put a little white highlight. You can use your fine liner in your white paint, but since I have my Posca out here, it just makes life a little faster. Easier, I meant. Makes it faster. I'll just put that little highlight on there so you can see those bubbles. And I think that the next thing we have to do is put our ghosts on. So we'll just let that dry for a little second, and then we'll put this back on here, and we'll trace our ghosts on, our outline of our ghosts. And I'm going to use my white transfer paper again. Painting it. All right, and I'll grab my stylus and we'll just get that little outline. We're darn close to being finished. I'm not going to worry about his mouth and eyes. We can put those in later just by freehanding. And then we'll get this guy over here. Okay, so now we have the outline of our ghost. You might not be able to see it very well, but you will see it better once I start shading. So these are pretty easy to do. There's not a whole lot of painting. We're just going to shade around that outer edge of the ghost so that we can see it. And I'll start about here, and we'll just start shading around just on the inside edge of that outline. And you may have to reload a few times. Reload your brush. These guys paint out pretty fast. And you can wait for that first layer to dry if you want to darken it up. When it dries, you can see if you need to darken that white shade up a bit, you can. And bring it right in here into the cauldron. And then we'll carry on up top here. So it's super easy. I'm just going to flip this around so I can get the other side. And it got a little wide there, but that's okay. I don't mind how that looks. You can see how it fades out a bit when it's dry, so you can just kind of go back over that if you need to. If it's too dark, just add a little bit of water to your brush and smooth it out. Alright, so we'll let that guy dry. And we'll come over to this one and do the same thing. So my paint's dragging a bit there, so I'm just going to add a bit of water to get it to smooth out. I'm going to be spinning, I'm sorry, because there's so many little angles on these that I need to be able to reach. And I'll flip him around and get the other side of his body. Add a little water to my brush. Last little bit here. Okay, so we'll let that guy dry. So now you can see your ghosts are there, and now I'm just going to shade in these little eyes, and then the mouth. And then with my fine liner and some white, and I'm just going to add some, you can do this with your Posca pen too if you want. I'm just going to use my fine liner. I'm just going to add a few little hash marks to our ghost here. If you don't want to add these, you don't have to. You can just leave them as is, whatever you want to do. Like so. Same with this guy, we'll add a few on him. That's good. And now we are at the point where I didn't outline the ghosts at all. I just left them like that, kind of misty looking. The next thing we're going to do in your kit, you would have got your little bats. So we're going to paint those out. And I gave you a sponge. And we'll just sponge those with some black and a little bit of gray to highlight. And let's move this out of the way so we can do that. I don't want to get paint on this, so I'll just move that to the side for a second. Don't mind my messy table. You know, grab a bit more black. So these are easy to paint out with the sponge that I gave you. So I'm just dipping straight in. And I'm just going to sponge the paint onto these bats. And it might take a couple coats because the first coat will probably sink into the wood and you'll see a little bit of wood through there. So just let it dry and go over it again. And then I took a little bit of that gray, just dipped into the gray, and I added a little bit of a highlight to that bottom edge just so we can see them a little better on that dark background. So I just kind of blended that in a bit. If you get too much gray on there, just dip back into your black. And you can repaint these. All right, so that's as easy as that is. You can add a little bit of that gray to your head too if you want to. It's up to you. Put a little bit of that on there. All right, we'll just get rid of that sponge. I'll move these bats over again and we'll bring the originals. Now you want to use some Gorilla Glue to glue these on. Just be careful you don't glue your fingers together because that stuff is crazy sticky. I'm not going to glue mine on right now just to save time, but I think you understand what I'm saying. I glued these ones onto the original, so those are on there and they're not going anywhere. So you just want to glue your bats on wherever you want to put them. And then the last thing that I did was take some marigold, and I just took my stylus and dipped straight into that, and I just added some little stars here and there. You can use white for your stars if you want to. I just used some yellow and put those randomly. You can put them on the ghost too because he's see-through, so you can make it look like those stars are in behind him. And these are just random wherever. Add as many or as few as you like. And I'm just going to go around my bats just like they were glued on there, just to show you. Put these stars everywhere. And then once your piece is completely dry, you can seal it with sealer of your choice. You can use the Deco Americana matte, or if you like it glossier, you can do a glossy finish. That is entirely up to you. That one shouldn't have went there because that's not on the sky. I think that's good. I think you get the idea. So you can just keep adding stars wherever you want stars. Big ones, small ones. There you go. So that is that. I hope you enjoyed the spooky witch painting, and we hope to see you for the next one. Bye now.